owns a black Explorer PG24, you need to move it. The truck is unable to get out because of where your car is parked, and now there's no way to get in and out of the hotel. So, someone here has a black Explorer on behalf of the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee. Welcome to this year's State Legislative Forum. For those of you who had to park in Dana Moore, we are running a show after the First, before we begin this morning's program, I want to ask a few people to stand up, and then I'll tell you why. Randy Beach, stand up. Is Dan Winnicke here? I didn't see him coming in. Probably trying to park. Rosemary Schoonmaker, stand up. Brian Gladwin, stand up.
Stand next to Joe. Well, Calvin.
Congratulations, Plattsburgh is now number 2 in the nation among small communities for economic development success. Great way to finish a week, I have to tell you. Let me introduce a few folks before we begin. My boss, Chairman of the Chamber, Pat Russell. Chairman of our Government Affairs Committee, John Van Etten. Our County Treasurer, Janet Dupree. From the Clinton County Legislature, Celine Paquette and Sarah Rowden. Supervisor of the Town of Peru, Ken John. Ken. You're doing a great job plowing Jenkins Street this year, too. Mayor of the village, or is it the city of Rouse's Point, George Rivers. Mayor of the city of Plattsburgh, or is it the village? No. Our partner, my colleague, and one of the partner organizations joined in this morning's event from the Lake Placid Visitors Bureau, Jim McKenna. It's my pleasure at this point to call upon Stevens Monday, President and CEO of CBPH Medical Center, whom we thank for their generous corporate sponsorship of this year's legislative breakfast.
First of all, I've been asked to take bids on a slightly damaged black Explorer. Selling it. Sorry, John. All right. I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to be a sponsor. CBPH is honored to do that. We have worked together with many of your organizations in the past year and are proud of what we've accomplished. Very exciting times for us, and hopefully you view us as an asset when you go to recruit new employees and people to this community. That's certainly our goal. We will be starting open heart surgery in June, and either the end of the summer or by September starting angioplasty. It's something that I think everyone in this community, statistically someone in this room will need that in the next year or so. I hope no one, I hope the statistics are wrong. It gets personal real quick. Just so you don't feel alone, I'm in that statistic, so we all bear that. We have 152 positions, and we're continuing to recruit. We've got some excellent things going on to replace neurosurgery here, which I know everybody's concerned about. All these plans are at risk, and I think the reason that I'm here today to really talk and listen to our representatives here, the governor has imposed in his budget, proposed budget, a 0.7% tax on hospitals and nursing homes. This year, CBPH is budgeted to have a 0.8% margin. Now, you do the math. If your business that has a 0.8% margin, first of all, you're not doing really well. We are at a 0.8% margin, and we're in the 30% of New York hospitals that in the past year had a positive margin. It's not a pretty picture. And, you know, it's a sick tax on a sick industry. And we can't survive it. We are very excited with that plan, so we're moving forward. We have a large renovation project that we'll be beginning and proposing to the state. Would you lend us money, John? I guess the message to everyone here is that while the tax is going to be on CVPH Medical Center, everybody in this room owns CVPH Medical Center, and it'll be a positive. You know, my obligation to this community is to run a strong financial organization, and we will pass that tax along to the people who can pay it and who do pay it through their bills at our organization. I was talking with one of our representatives here, and I was embarrassed to learn that she had 20 letters opposing this and 400 letters opposing the fiscal tax. You know, I guarantee her by next Friday that ratio will change. With that note, I thank you for the opportunity to be here and look forward to our presentation today. Thank you.
As you came in, and if you didn't pick one up, be sure as you go out, there is a complete set of the results of this year's annual issue survey, which we released a couple of days ago. You saw a summary in the news media, but the full detailed results are on the table outside. So if you didn't pick one up on your way out, please do so. It'll give you the full answer to all of the questions that we posed. As we indicated at the press conference the other day, we were very gratified by the result. It went out to more businesses than ever, thanks to our partnership with the Upper Lake Chamber, which added Southern Franklin County to the survey area this year. 2,400 businesses were surveyed. We had greater than a 20% response rate to a blind mail survey. That's typical of what we received in the past. It makes the results very credible. It makes it a very meaningful expression of the will and opinion of the regional business community. The most gratifying result, and it's just great that it came a couple of days ahead of the site selection news. It all kind of fits together. It reinforces the story with the business confidence index this year, 92%, actually up 1% from last year. Who'd have thought we could move up the site selection list another notch and move up the business confidence index? It was already so high, yet another percentage point. There is a strong sense of optimism here. We believe there's some good reasons for that. But as the survey indicates, and as we continue to convey to our representatives, there are clouds on the horizon, there are concerns, there are issues, there are impediments, there are things that we need to take care of to make sure we stay at the top of that list in Site Selection Magazine, to make sure that in the future we continue to have that kind of strong performance when we ask business how confident they are about the future. It isn't all, we can't just look at a rose-colored glasses, well, everything is fine, so we don't have to do anything, look how high these numbers are. We want to keep those numbers high, and there are some things that could drive them down if we don't fix them. And in your survey results, in your submissions, you told us what a number of those things are, and I'm going to summarize them for our guests as a lead into this morning's discussion. On the state level, amongst all of the questions that we asked you, we asked what the top priorities are, what your top concerns are, those things that you feel are most urgent that the governor and legislators in Albany do something about this year before they finish their work later this year. Number one, far and away, no surprise, third year in a row, health insurance costs. And I hate to tell you, I can't identify it, but there's a company in town that we were pleased, it's not a large one, so we were pleased to bring them here several years ago. But they're in the process of leaving. And they're in the process of leaving, going back to the home state they came from, and they told us yesterday what the reason is: health insurance and workers' comp costs in the state of New York. Their bottom line can be better in another state. So we're getting back to those days that New York State moved away from several years ago in terms of being a high-cost bottom line state. And we're in danger of slipping back into that, in part because of the threat, perhaps, of new taxes and fees in Albany. I'm going to come to it in a minute. But particularly because of those other costs that aren't quote-unquote taxes They are taxes because the reason they're so expensive is in part policies and actions and accumulation of policies and regulations and mandates and so on that have occurred in Albany over a number of years that are now driving those costs like workers' comp and liability insurance and health insurance and so on up. Those are taxes. Because they're impacted by public actions, they are in fact an indirect tax. And they are the greatest clouds in the horizon, health insurance being number one about them. We can thank our own North Country legislators for helping us do some meaningful things about that. This year we kept Blue Shield in this market. Thanks to our friends here today, and we thank them for that. That was an incredibly important element to maintaining at least a reasonably competitive health insurance market here versus if the leading player had left this market. We got sole proprietor legislation last year. That helped those self-employed people try to control their costs. But the time has come to do something comprehensively about this problem. We can't continue to nibble at it around the edges. We are in danger in the next few years of seeing some reverse of the trend of bringing jobs in and trying to keep up with what may become a treadmill effect if we don't start driving down some of these costs. We have said that loud and clear. Number two fits right into that. It's interesting how these things really fit together, and they show a very comprehensive picture of the mindset and what's happening out there, addressing the state budget gap by reducing state spending and not raising taxes. We cannot go back to the days of raising taxes, and by the way, a fee is a tax, and by the way, a mandate is a tax, and by the way, cost shifting onto counties and so on is a tax. Not doing something or doing things that make workers' comp and health insurance and so on cost more is a tax. And I know you're saying that you don't want any of those taxes raised. It's not just about the things that are officially called a tax. It's about all things that are in fact an indirect tax as well. And that the state budget gap does not exist because we're undertaxed in the state of New York. It exists because New York still needs to get its spending house in order, and there are many ways to do that. Number three, for the first time, and I suggest it's because business people are savvy, they understand how these things fit together, Medicaid reform. Never turned up in our priorities before, it turned up this year, and that's because clearly there's an understanding that that is one of the forces driving cost of business. It's driving the state budget gap to a degree, and it's also driving property taxes with business concerned about to a large degree because of that cost shifting onto the counties that goes on. And indirectly, in the way Medicaid works on our providers and hospitals and so on, all of these things work in to affecting the bottom line costs. You also said on other issues that liability reform remains a major concern. Clearly, business understands that that is a core ingredient to getting insurance costs under control in this state, health insurance, liability insurance, workers' comp, et cetera, to change the liability environment in this state. You spoke loudly about workers' comp and the need for another round of meaningful reform. And by the way, you've just joined with the Business Council, many of you in the last week, in sending an expression of outrage that some in the state legislature are now looking to pander to certain interests by actually going out to significantly increase the benefit level of workers' comp, but not in tangent with any reform. The Business Council and others have actually acknowledged in the past, you know what, the benefit levels in New York, it's very strange. New York has the highest cost workers' comp system, doesn't have the highest benefits. And that's because there's so much wrong with the system. The money is going elsewhere. The money isn't necessarily benefiting to the maximum degree the actual legitimate beneficiary who ought to be getting certainly the benefits that they deserve. And the business community in the state is prepared to look at something that would increase the actual benefit level to the worthy beneficiaries, but only in sync with meaningful reforms about what's wrong with the rest of the system. It needs to be a package. And what's presently on the table in Albany is not a package. But hopefully we can get to a package before the session is over and do something that may in fact give more benefit to the deserving beneficiaries at the same time reduce the cost of employers. It can be done because of all the things that are wrong with the system. It determines how things are done, where all of that money goes other than to the deserving beneficiary. You had a lot to say. You always do. North Country business has opinions and they're not afraid to express it. And it makes it easier for our legislators, at least in the sense that they know how you feel. And they get a very clear signal from you. And I think you did it once again in this survey. You also, again, reaffirmed the importance of a number of strategic projects here in the North Country as being part and parcel of why you're optimistic about the future, but that these things have to be finished for that optimism to be maintained. Many of them really are more matters that we're working on in Washington than the state, but there are always ways that the state can be of assistance. Our friends have been, and I know will continue to be, developing the Plattsburgh International Airport, making our border work at Champlain, continuing to upgrade facilities at Orla and Lake Placid, working with our friends in Tupper Lake, the Natural History Museum, Scenic Rail Extension, some other projects there. We will get these things done, and you've affirmed by 90% degree that these things are also important ingredients to the total economic picture. With that, it's my pleasure at this point to call in turn on each of our North Country legislators to offer some opening remarks and impressions and perhaps some of their reaction to some of what you've collectively said, and then we'll come back and have some time to take some questions. We're not going to get to everybody in the room, I'm afraid, but everybody in here has a question. And the challenge of this forum is that unfortunately we can't stay here all day, so hopefully a number of you also caught our friends as they circulated around the room before breakfast, and we'll take the opportunity maybe to catch some of them one-on-one afterwards if you don't happen to be able to be amongst the few that were going to be able to call on for a question today. With that, it's my pleasure at this point to call on our State Senator Betty Little, who I also want to thank, by the way. One of the key things that's happening to this area that feeds that site selection number and that business confidence is the new strategic position this region finds itself in the Quebec New York border with our attachment to Montreal, which in a couple of weeks, to tease you a bit, we're going to have a major announcement about a new partnership related to the Montreal region. We are about to be acknowledged by Montreal as their U.S. suburb. And I'll just leave it at that. But facilitating that and working on that has been furthered in good measure by the support in obtaining some seed funding and continuing to provide support by our State Senator Betty Little, who also remains an honorary member, honorary chairman of the Governing Council of the Quebec New York Corridor Coalition, our Senator Betty Little.
Challenge with the comments and the issues. And so I'll begin first with some good news, and I would just like to introduce my Plattsburgh staff, who I'm joined with today. Nancy Dufresne, a former Clinton County legislator and former Plattsburgh teacher. Nancy has been joined in Plattsburgh by Paul Maroon. Spent 2 years on active reserve duty in Washington, D.C., which we thank him for, and is now a Franklin County legislature. So, as in my family, where I have 6 children and several in-laws who are always lobbying me about their issues, I have 2 county legislators who will be lobbying me on the issues that are important to the counties. And having been there once, believe me, I know those issues. First of all, congratulations. Plattsburgh does it again, now number 2, and I'm sure number 1 eventually. There's no way you're going to stop it being number 2. So congratulations for all the hard work. And also for the attendance today. It's unbelievable. I hate to say this, but in Glens Falls you could not get this many people out this early in the morning. So I will give them that challenge at some point. We in the Senate are in the process right now of looking at the governor's budget. We have subcommittees. I've served on 2 of them. We have made our proposals for what we will call the Senate resolution, where we come back with issues and how we feel that they can be done and better dealt with than what the governor has proposed. We've also have hired a firm who did a revenue estimate for us, and the Senate has come up with additional revenues of $201 million according to this firm. The Assembly majority has come up with $605, I think, million of additional revenue. And that is the key, because in this budget, if you take away the surcharge, and I'll have to tell you, when I was first in the Assembly, we did that 8.18% surcharge. And I had a guy literally charge in the office, waving some papers in his hand, telling me about this. Did you vote for this 8.18% tax? And I was naive enough to say, oh, no, sir, that wasn't a tax, that was a surcharge. Last time, never do that. And I tried to get my head back on. There's a lot of those things that are in there, but, you know, we're not in the same financial condition we were in last year, thank God, nor the year before and the year before. The personal income tax revenues make up about 60% of all New York State tax collections. In 2001-3, as a result of 9/11, they were down 3%. 2002-3, with the real impact, they were down 11%. Last year, they were up 7%, and I fully realized that part of that was the increase in the personal income tax rate on the higher income tax earners that I voted for. However, in 2004-5, the personal income tax is estimated to be up 10.2%. In addition, that personal income tax surcharge went down, and the growth is making up for the difference. So hopefully we're going to find ourselves in better condition, and we will be able to change some of the things that I know that you are concerned about. Certainly, I don't support the 7% on the hospitals, nor do I taking the nursing homes back up to 6% and adding 7% to long-term home health care. But we can't change any of those things until we can show where the money is and how you can put them back in the budget. So a lot of work ongoing on that proposal. I know that health insurance is the #1 issue, not just in this area, throughout the district. I spent yesterday afternoon at an automobile dealer in the Queens Ferry area, and other than vicarious liability, which is a major concern, and I'm sure Chris will touch upon that as well, we have voted for that in the Senate. And he and Teresa, I'm sure, will tell you, you have got to turn up the heat on Shelley Silver to get this passed this year. And I'll leave that to them to deal with. But health insurance was their major issue. In New York State, it's estimated that the state spends $9 billion on health costs for health programs, as well as paying for the uninsured, whereas the local communities end up spending $6 billion for a total expenditure in New York State of $15 billion. That being said, we know that insurance costs are increasing, and the last 5 years we've had double-digit increases, and that's expected again for this year. Who to blame? Well, one of the things we have to look at is that we have the best health care in the world. We have people surviving with cancer. We have people surviving on diabetes and dialysis for years. We have so many things. And in my own office right now, one gal's 3-year-old went for pink eye and ended up with open heart surgery the following week. And 3 days later was running around the house. I mean, absolutely phenomenal achievements in healthcare. A 30-year-old Senate fellow who's a graduate of law school and is working in the office this year had pneumonia. His x-ray showed something in his lung. Last week he had a lung removed. It is cancer. He is going for chemotherapy and all of that. Thank God he had health insurance as a Senate fellow. But the costs, we know, are enormous. To address this, and I usually don't like to talk about proposals because some people confuse it and think they've already happened. Well, this hasn't happened, but this is our Senate proposal for the reform of health care. And when we speak about reform, by the way, I was privileged to spend 6 months on the Medicaid task force reform. And in the end, with the help of everyone, I mean all kinds of providers, receivers, everyone who was involved in health care, we were able to present over 40 recommendations for reform to Medicaid that would save at the county level, but even more so would save at the state level, would still give quality health care to Medicaid recipients, but would do a better job of it. And the governor has incorporated many of those recommendations in his budget plan, and of course we supported those. So hopefully I think we will see something happen. This is our Senate health plan, and I have it here. I also have a wonderful booklet that was put together by Senate Research on the health insurance market in New York State, strategies for affordable coverage. And if any of you want one of these, I'll just leave it out and jot your name and address on the back, and we'll see that you get sent one. But we've come up with several proposals that we believe will help, and one of them, and one that we've supported in the past and continue to support, is a tax credit for those businesses who do provide health insurance. We're always doing something for the uninsured. How about the ones who don't provide health insurance? 60% of all small businesses provide health insurance to their employees, which means 40% don't. We need some kind of incentive. This would be like 20% of their premium would be a tax credit. And that, along with their business deduction, would be a savings. There's like a 10-year growth period where we increase this. But it's a beginning, and it's an acknowledgement of the businesses who are providing health care. And I think that we need to push and promote this issue. A second thing would be to offer health savings accounts. The Medicare federal bill allows for them. New York State does not allow for high deductible premiums on health insurance. So we need legislation to make that happen. This would offer premiums which would be like a minimum of a deductible with a minimum of $1,000, and it could be up to $5,000, which would reduce the premium. That single person could also have a contribution in their health savings account of $2,600 a year, and then they become responsible for making some of their health care decisions. When a second set of x-rays offered, maybe they say, hey, wait a minute, I just had x-rays at Dr. So-and-so's, let's get those over here. Some of the decisions then would be on the patient to make some of these. And we think that this could really help. The other thing is that $2,500 rolls over. You know, it's pre-tax dollars, and the money that it earns is tax-free, and in the end, it becomes another 401k retirement account that you can use for health costs. You can also use it to buy long-term home health care insurance, which we must encourage people to do. We've got to get a product that is more affordable, but we've got to get people buying long-term home health care insurance. Something like over 80% of all the people in nursing homes are on Medicaid. And a lot of them are there because they have divested themselves of their assets, despite the fact that New York State has the most generous spousal asset program. You can actually keep up to $92,000 of your assets, not including your home, and you can have an income of over $2,000 a month, and your spouse can still be on Medicaid in a nursing home. So we need to really, that's one of our proposals. The governor has a proposal to do something about that as well. But I believe that these health savings accounts, and I've been doing some research on them for a couple of years, could be helpful. I mean, certainly not to the person who is very needy with health care costs, but certainly to the healthier person who doesn't have health insurance, but just doesn't feel that $800 a month is worth it. We also want to add money to the Stop Loss Fund. This is the fund which helps for the direct payer who has their direct pay insurance, and this helps, the state will cover those costs between $20,000 and $100,000 of medical care. So that fund is funded at $25 million, which only allows for 55% of that funding to happen. We want to be able to do 90% of those costs between $20,000 and $100,000. And we need to additionally fund that program. So we've got a nice proposal, I believe. The booklet is good, and you know what we look for in the legislature is support and encouragement for those programs. And as Stevens mentioned, you know, your letters really count. It's important that we hear from you. David Kuzelnicki from Glens Falls Hospital said, I just want you to know you're going to start getting a lot of letters from Glens Falls Hospital. And I said, well, I'll stack them up against Devil's Hide and see if they can get any higher than the ones I had from there. So it's critical that you get involved, that you write your letters, that we know what's important. And I know a lot of people are interested in this fee on pistol permits and all the sportsmen and all. We are very hopeful with this additional money that we're not going to be able to, that we're not going to have to resort to that kind of surcharge. The other thing is, we're hoping that we'll be able to get the deficit down from the estimated $5 billion down to more in the neighborhood of $4 billion. And yet the key is, as Gary said, to curtail spending, and yet everybody is looking for money. And everybody is looking for money from the state, every organization, every project, and we want to help. But in the end, you have to say, where does it all end? And how do we become more efficient at the state level? If you call any of the state agencies, you will know that Governor Pataki has a freeze. He's had it for a number of years. You have not seen big additions in state employees throughout this state. Maybe in a couple of areas, the state police, security, and DEC for additional programs. And there are some good programs in DEC coming down the pike because of the Superfund, the Brownfield legislation, which will help communities, municipalities restore these sites and get them back on the tax roll. And the property tax is another issue, and I won't keep going on. But, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Moving right along, I'll call on our good friend, the senior member of the New York State Assembly from the North Country, Chris Orville.
Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce invites you to your St. Patrick's Day. That's right. I'll advertise that. Wednesday, March 7th.
March 7th.
Stevens, first of all, it's important that these breakfasts be sponsored, and we do recognize the civic mission and awareness that you brought to CDPH, and your sponsorship of this event is very important. However, your advertising methods for angioplasty, I don't know, Rick. Might be onto something, I thought you were saying everybody in this room is good. Now, we were talking with Frank and Barbara earlier about their effective advertising for Eric Dorrance, and if you haven't seen it, you're not watching Fox News. But it's very effective. Maybe you could take a page out of that book. Start off with, everybody in this audience is going to need our products by the end of today. I normally walk by this parking lot in the morning. It's so good to see so many of you who wave and blow your horns when I'm out walking to be able to talk to you this morning. You know, I've never seen this parking lot this full. Never. When you walk by, there's never cars all the way out to Cornelia Street, and that's a mark. I thought it was either a wedding reception or a Howard Dean fundraiser. That's this afternoon. We were down in, Gary alluded to the announcement he's going to make later this week.
Next couple.
I can give you a sneak preview. It should be, but it's not, changing the name of the chamber. The Southern Quebec Chamber of Commerce. But in absolute truth, it is funny, but it really makes a point. Whenever I'm introduced to someone I don't know and who doesn't know where I'm from, the most effective way of saying where I'm from is to say I'm from Southern Quebec. That really, they laugh and then they go, oh, you really must be far up north. And that also is a good conversation opener. We were at Canada Day in Albany earlier in the week, and the Canadian government sponsored a day-and-a-half reception, breakfast, luncheon, and seminars on the issues that are important between our the state and all of Canada, per se. What was most interesting, and it was funny in a way, but it was also very instructive, is that, first of all, Randy Beach was there, John Clark and John Etling and Chris Turkey were there, Gary, of course, was there. Dan Stewart was there. And the absolute, this is no joke, the Canadians were introducing these people to the rest of New York. The Canadians were saying, have you met the mayor of Plattsburgh? Have you met Gary Douglas? Have you met... Now think about it. People I mentioned and many, many others of you in the room are as well known in Canada as you are in Albany, and probably better known in Canada than you are in Buffalo, Syracuse, or New York City. And that's with the possible exception of those who do business in those places. When I spoke to the chamber dinner last month, I talked about the importance of thinking big, thinking grand visions for individual businesses and for community. Stevens Mundy has already referenced the expansion of our medical center. We've mentioned the new Plattsburgh International Airport, and I've also heard a number of people say, I hope it's big enough to at least pay for the snow and ice removal. Well, it needs to be a lot bigger than that, and it can be a lot bigger than that if the community, and this chamber is the starting place, thinks big. But in thinking big, I think it's really important to understand. Site Selection Magazine, now we're #2. We've been in the top 10 for 5 years. And I think we can be #1. By the way, New York State is #2 state this year as well. And thanks to the fact that Watertown is #22, Ogdensburg is #55. We're not alone. But the point was made that the competition is taking notice. How do we know the competition is taking notice? We see them changing their approaches. And in some ways, we also see them beginning to compete with us. Now that can be a positive thing, but it can also get ugly. Competition, after all, is competition. As we seek to expand even bigger, particularly with regard to our medical center and our hospital, let's just bear in mind that the competition may not like what we're doing. We just had a recent issue with Burlington and an ambulance over on this side of the lake. That's emblematic of the kinds of things that a small, sleepy little town like we were 50 years ago doesn't get into that kind of competition. So when you think big, when you aim high, and when you do the things that we are doing already in our individual businesses and as a community, we may be entering a phase where we have to be ready to compete at a much higher level. After all, if you go to the plate against the New York Yankees, you do expect the pitches to be harder, higher, and sometimes a little inside. And that's the name of that big league ball game. As we enter the big leagues, we need to be ready to compete. And I think this community is. I think we are ready. And I think with that, we will do very, very, very well. The only thing I want to add to that is a concern about, I'd like to just take a page out of Betty's remarks for a minute. Medical savings accounts and tort reform are really emblematic of the keys here. First of all, tort reform. When you talk about the cost of health care, not just the insurance, but the care, you have to factor in the unseen tax caused by the exposure to liability. One of the reasons New York's workers' comp payouts are not as great, despite having the highest premiums, is because of the inordinately high reserves that are required to be maintained in order to provide for the contingency of multi-million-dollar awards. With tort reform, meaningful tort reform, not just nibbling around the edges, but real tort reform, real limits on frivolous lawsuits, real limits on punitive damages, and some of the other things that we're addressing. These reserves will come down because they're mathematically driven. The premiums will come down, and there will be room for increased benefits, if that's in order. But only if we change the bottom. If your house is tilting, a new roof is not indicated. A new foundation is what's indicated. And while the house may be tilting in such a way that the water is running off the roof in the wrong place, the problem is still not the roof. And so it is with health care, so it is with every form of insurance, construction insurance. We need to change the scaffold law to eliminate the strict liability in the event of an injury from a fall from a scaffold or a ladder or a roof. We need to change vicarious liability so we can bring back choice for people in getting new cars. Think about the leasing option in New York, and I know there's some dealers in the room. Think about the leasing option in rural New York. It's not just a benefit to the dealer, although the UAW and the car dealers are losing business and are losing jobs because New York is the only state that still has strict vicarious liability against the company that leases a car and rents a car. But it's not only the dealers and the manufacturers and the auto workers, it's the customers that lose. When you are, and many of you in the room do this, when you travel 50 miles one way to work every day, you put a lot of miles on that car. And for a person with that amount of commute in their daily financial picture, leasing is often the best option. We don't have it in New York anymore because of vicarious liability and the unwillingness of the New York State Assembly to repeal a law that was passed in 1926 when the only leased vehicles were limousines driven by hired drivers who didn't have a penny in their pocket. In those days, attaching strict liability to the owner of that limousine was the only way anybody was ever going to collect an award for an injury. Today, that's not the case. The drivers of leased cars have their own insurance just as if they owned the cars. And there's no reason in the world why the auto company should have to do that. Well, they don't anymore. They've pulled out of New York. There is no more leasing in New York. We need to change that. And the same thing about tort reform is true with health insurance and across the board. Medical insurance, medical savings accounts are a great idea. The Congress in 1995 began making that possible. It is really, really refreshing to see the idea finally catching on in New York State. And Senator Little, Senator Bruno, and your colleagues are to be commended for putting that out. Medical savings account gets to the heart of the question, as my wife puts it. You know, my car insurance doesn't pay for my oil change. And my homeowner's insurance doesn't pay for painting the trim on the house. But our medical insurance pays for every single analogous expense in health care. And no wonder it costs so much, because it pays for everything. In order to transition to a more common sense approach to paying for health care, the medical savings account does two things. It guarantees that you have a catastrophic policy by allowing you, by encouraging you, and by requiring you to buy a high deductible. So if your expenses are over $3,000 or $3,500 or whatever that is, you're covered. But a high deductible policy has a very low premium compared to the first dollar, third payer coverage of the policies we have today. By recognizing that health insurance is a benefit to most employees who have it through work, and it's a benefit to those employees whose companies would like to offer it if they could, the principle of the medical savings account is to take the other money. If a premium on a full coverage policy is $4,000 and you can buy a high deductible policy for $1,000, give the employee the other $3,000 in cash. Or, in this case, in the form of a medical savings account. Now it's their money. The cost to the business is lowered by the lower cost of the high deductible premium. The employee has the wherewithal to make those first dollar medical expenses on their own, and as Senator Little said, make that decision not to have a second set of x-rays or a second set of dentures, which often happens in the dental world. And costs will go down. It's been tried. Many, many companies around the country have adopted it. It has reduced medical insurance costs. It has improved patient care by re-involving the patient in his or her health care. It has improved cost effectiveness by bringing back the market forces in health care. And it is really, I think, an answer to some of our problems. So with that, there are many, many more things we can discuss, and we should, and I welcome your questions, and thanks for your attendance.
Always my pleasure to introduce the next member of our North Country team in Albany, an alumnus of the Board of Directors of our chamber, and off to a great start on our behalf in Albany, Assemblywoman Teresa Sigler.
Thank you so much for having me here this morning. To be here with all of you is so important to get your input. I must congratulate the Chamber of Commerce. They always turn out the best crowd anywhere that I go. I had prepared some words this morning, but my colleagues before me have said just about everything. We really do have a team with Assemblyman Ortloff and our wonderful Senator Betty Little in the North Country working together for you. We talked about tort reform. Chris and I, we've been working on it for 2 years now. We'll continue to push for it. Certainly Senator Little has worked extremely hard on Medicaid reform. She's on every committee that you can think of, and she's working very, very hard for you. She may not stand on chairs like some of the newspapers indicate that we should be doing, but while the others are standing on the chairs, she's out there working for you, and she's making sure that things get done. So we do work together, and instead of my standing here and talking about things you've already heard about, I'm hoping to hear from you. So given that, I'm here to listen and to try to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
With that, we'll turn to questions and comments, and hopefully be able to take several in the time we have. In the interest of trying to accommodate a few additional people, please, I just ask that you keep your question or your comment as succinct as possible. The shy gentleman in the back.
One major issue that's affecting the cities, and the legislators are certainly aware of this, is the retirement system of the state of New York. Currently, the city of Plattsburgh receives $1.8 million per year in revenue sharing from the state of New York. In 2002, our bill for our retirement system was $200,000. This year it goes to $1.8 million. We have now lost our entire share from the state of New York for revenue. If we didn't impact on taxes, that would be about a 76% tax increase for the city of Plattsburgh. But because of other ways of trying to control costs, we've reduced that down dramatically. Well, actually, I don't like raising taxes at all, but every year we have to do it because of health care and this retirement system. Is Hevesy going to be forced into a compromise on this issue? The comptroller must allow communities not to be devastated and local taxpayers to continue to pay for a retirement system unlike any other that anybody else in this room in the private sector has to lose on in the stock market themselves.
Thank you. I had the honor of speaking to the Conference of Mayors on Monday because Senator Bruno was not able to go, so he asked me to speak to them, and that was their number one issue. And it's a huge concern because this is an enormous cost to towns and villages, to our schools for their non-teaching personnel. What has happened is the retirement fund was not funded fully when the stock market dropped. The stock market has moved back up, fortunately, and it is almost fully funded. We had agreement between the Senate, the governor, and the Assembly at one point. Then the comptroller got involved in the program, and the Assembly kind of went with the comptroller. Not that politics gets involved in anything, but and it is an election year. But that has kind of spoiled the mix. But the pressure is on. I do believe we're going to resolve the issue. Last year we passed legislation that no community would ever contribute less than 4.5% of their salary. I mean, the comptroller is the one who decided that 0% was all right a few years ago, and 1% and all these low percentages. So we're interested in seeing that they never contribute less than 4.5%, but what the governor is saying is your contribution shouldn't increase more than 2% per year, and at least smooth out. If you need more payments to the fund, we have to do it. One of the things that we have to look at that will not be looked at this year is the type of retirement system and the way we fund it as it is. It is a defined benefit system. Many places have gone to a cash basis retirement system that is more movable, as our workforce is more mobile. So, you know, the way it is now, we have to account for every employee and what they would be making when they retire and make sure that that fund is funded to that extent. The whole thing is, this isn't necessary to put the municipalities in this position to have to pay this kind of money this year. So we have a pension reform. I mean, we got a reform for everything, I guess. That's what it's all about. But we have a bill that would, we're negotiating that percentage, but we agree with the governor. We also adopt some of the comptroller's issues and bring those into. We also think that a municipality should be able to pay some of this out of their reserves, and we believe that they should be able to set aside money as they go along for future retirement costs. It's going to be worked on, and I'm sure that this is one issue that will be resolved. There isn't anyone in the legislature, well, at least I hope there's no one in the legislature, that isn't going to work on this. I mean, our local governments are on our backs, and rightly so, because they shouldn't have to do it. And how do they do it? They raise your taxes. And the mayor doesn't want to raise taxes. I don't like raising taxes. I mean, that, you know, it's horrendous when you end up voting for something that's going to take more money out of the pocket of the taxpayer. And yet, you know, you have to decide. A tax is a tax, an income tax, a property tax. We don't raise it, who does raise it? So there's a lot of issues here, but we don't want to see this happen.
Just very briefly. Dan, Gary mentioned something about senior member of the delegation. I woke up January 4th and realized that two people who'd served longer than I, Ron Stafford and Bob Norris, had retired from the legislature, and I was being called the dean of the North Country delegation. I still feel like a freshman. But in that regard, I remember in the early 90s, Dan, and this is just a cautionary note to everybody who's in municipal government, when you wanted revenue sharing increase, instead they gave you pension contribution deductions. And there were not a few mayors at that time who said, wait a minute, that's not real money. We really need the revenue sharing, but you were sold a bill of goods, and now it's come back to haunt you. Let's learn a lesson. I think we will resolve the issue this year, but also in the future, maybe it would be possible to keep everybody, George Rivers, I'm sure will beat the drum too, remembering that if you need revenue sharing, you need revenue sharing, and don't accept anything less, because that other stuff isn't real money.
I see another shy gentleman in the back. Mike.
My name is Mike Lenhard. My wife and I own the campground Yogi Bear Camping Resort in North Hudson. I like to be considered a suburb of Plattsburgh with a lot of excitement here. We are a suburb of nothing, and it's probably one of the worst depressed areas along the Northway. I don't know who would like to address it. I don't want to be a broken record, but we seriously need the cell phone service. That accident brought that. Last week brought that to a serious head. I mean, people crash all the time. They're not in touch with the world. They get off at our exit. They're frantic. We don't have a gas station. We don't have signs on the Northway. It is not a friendly corridor. You know, we need to tell people about the services. The campground's doing well, but I'll tell you what, it's a hard-fought battle.
Nothing's further than the truth that it's not a friendly corridor, but keep in mind, it is picturesque. And the DOT drive us nuts. I mean, if I could tell you how much I have argued about signs since I got into the legislature, it is incredible. But let's get to the cell phones. No one's a bigger user. I think I have 2,600 minutes a month, and I use more than that, and there's 3 weekends and whatever. But we thought we had this solved. We had Crown Communications, who has a contract with the state for cell towers and all, and they had Sprint, they were gonna put up this 38-foot, and I call them poles, they are not towers. They would be along the right-hand side of the Northway. They gave a vertical signal, so you would be able to use your cell phone on the Northway. And using your cell phone on the Northway maybe sounds like, oh, that's not terribly important. But if we ever intend to have this corridor be a high-tech corridor from Quebec to Albany, hey, high-tech people use cell phones, and they need them. And to get on there, you know, it's one thing, even in Washington County, they don't have consistent service. I see, you know, minutes where I click off and have to do, are you there, and all that stuff, can you hear me? But if you can go 40 miles and you can't use your cell phone, it's ridiculous. And we will never get to that point till we have cell phone service on the Northway. So anyway, Sprint's going to do the thing. It's not going to cost state any money. It's going to bring everybody in. Okay, start building. Well, there they went. That was the end of them. They decided that it was too expensive to power those poles, because there aren't power lines directly along the Northway. There is a fiber optic cable, you can't get into that or something, I don't know. There's all kinds of issues with that. We have a meeting March 8th that we're working on. We've gone to NYSERDA to say, well, if power lines are too expensive, how about fuel cells? Could we have a fuel cell there? And in talking to Peter Smith of NYSERDA the other day, he thinks that the solar things would work with battery. I said, there's not a lot of sunlight all the time, you know, in the winter, but with battery backup at the poles might be able to work. So it is a complicated issue. We have talked to our congressmen. They are interested in helping us out. You know, would there be state funding? We certainly would go after it, but we've got to come up with a plan, and we've got to get a viable plan. They've been to rural networks to see if they were interested. It's just too expensive to get the power right now, but we're working on it. And I really hope I will resolve this issue at some point. If, I don't know how, but we're definitely going to get that done.
Cell phone coverage in the North Country is unbelievably poor. I can get in my car at my home in Willsboro, New York, and drive into Hamilton County, and then if I have a meeting in Glens Falls, I will drive 127 miles without one signal. That's unacceptable. When you see in the paper that Senator Schumer is complaining because there are pockets in New York City on city blocks that you can't get coverage, he ought to be driving around 127 miles without coverage, and he would know what it's like. It is an issue of money. The senator hit it right on the head. It's difficult to provide services in the North Country, whether it's health care services or whether it's cell phone coverage, because we don't have enough people to really make it profitable. But we're working on it, we'll continue to work on it, and the sign issue, we are relentless. Betty and I met yesterday, she met with DOT, I met with DOT, Chris talks continually about it. We're getting very, very close to maybe getting some attraction signs on the Northway, but it's always a difficult issue when you're dealing with the aesthetics that you deal with when you drive across that imaginary blue line. But we continue to work on it, and we will not give up.
We're getting all the shy people this morning.
There's an explosive proposal for small businesses that's been proposed by Dennis Rivera, I think his name is. He's the head of one of the healthcare unions in New York City. He's an ally of the governor's, actually, in the last election. And he has proposed something called play or pay for small businesses to have to, I think they actually pay a tax, the way it looks like, of quite a large sum if they don't provide health care for their employees. And we don't know where it is or anything like that. I haven't heard anything about it.
Want to say that loud?
It's in the garbage.
For those of you who haven't heard it, a brief summary. Dennis Rivera. If you don't know who Dennis Rivera is, wake up. We talk about his contracts with our healthcare providers all expiring in the same month in 2005 and the power that may give. But right now, they're proposing, and I think they've asked a lot more than they're going to get, but that's really not the point. What will they get? It's called pay or play. If you don't offer health insurance, going to pay $3,000 per employee, and the state will provide it for you. That's Dennis's proposal. Now, there's a counter proposal that I think is even more worrisome. I think Betty's right. That's dead on arrival. But like so many ideas, you ask for the moon and then you intend only to get a little bit of a camel's nose under the tent. Pete Granis, yesterday, Pete Granis is the chairman of the Assembly Insurance Committee, as a counter proposal to Senator Bruno and Senator Little's insurance proposal, Granis said, no, I think what we need to do is not incentivize small, I'm paraphrasing, Pete doesn't ever talk this plainly. I don't think we should incentivize and offer a reward or a tax credit if they do. I think we should punish them if they don't, with a 50-cent tax per employee, probably per payroll period. But even that is the wrong approach. It's just backwards. The problem, again, goes back to tort reform. It goes back to fundamental reasons why the costs are so high, and you don't make it better by punishing people. I mean, think about it. Even if you've grown way beyond being a small business, and even if you are, even if you're now providing health insurance and you make it work, and your bottom line is still healthy what you provide it, there's nobody that I know in the category of not offering health insurance who wouldn't offer it if he could afford it. Why would you say to your employees, we don't really want to keep you around here. We don't really want to make you happy. We don't really want to help you out. Of course not. The only reason any employee in this state doesn't have health insurance is that it doesn't make economic sense to provide it. And you don't make that situation better by charging people 50 cents a week as punishment. You help them. You cut the costs and you give them incentives. Dennis Rivera can listen to that directly.
It's been said. Good. It's unanimous.
Yes. Oh, by the way, can I say one more thing? No, listen. The proposal is out there for a 50% tax credit for those who offer it. When Dennis Rivera passed HICRA 2000 in December 1999, he didn't accept a 50% contribution for his people. He got 100%. In that bill, the only workers in the state were singled out were the health care workers, members of Local 1199 of the, what do they call them? The Service Employees International Union. In that bill, the state of New York paid the full cost of all the health insurance for every one of his employees. And with that background, I don't think that the business community ought to settle for 50% tax credit. You ought to demand 100% and see what Dennis Rivera thinks about that.
Is intended primarily for Senator Little. We know that about half of pregnancies in this country are still unintended. And we know about the economic impact that can have on communities in terms of lack of educational attainment, removal of people from the workforce, and the high cost of Medicaid when people can't pay for that baby and that pregnancy. There was a bill before the Assembly recently, and thank you, Teresa, for supporting that bill, called the Unintended Pregnancy Prevention Act. It went after passage to the Senate, and the Senate put it on hold because there's a similar bill before the FDA right now. Last week, the FDA decided that they were going to postpone a decision on that despite a strong recommendation from the FDA advisory panel to approve that. It appears that decision will not be made until after the presidential election. And so my question is, will the Senate take up this bill again and give women the right to have emergency contraception available over the counter, which will go a long way toward preventing unwanted pregnancies and abortions in this country and in our own North Country?
Thank you. last year or the year before, we passed the contraceptive prescription bill that would require insurances to cover contraceptive pills for a person. And that was even controversial, and yet we did it. And we also have passed the morning after, where, and it's not an abortion type of thing, it is a Plan B pill, and it's like a double dosage of a contraceptive pill that will prevent a pregnancy from occurring. We passed that, and we required that, and it was worked out. There was a negotiated way of working it out, so hospitals and emergency rooms would be required not only to give the information, but to provide that contraceptive. This is another measure that goes a bit further to having it on the over-the-counter, that there would be a wide-open prescription that you could go into any pharmacist and be able to get it. There are some concerns on this bill, and I have not fully committed to supporting the bill, but I think there are parts to it that I support and other things that we need to be looking at. This is one of the things that we call the mandates on health insurance that everyone screams about as well. This doesn't affect your health insurance because it's over the counter. However, although it is a prescription and it would be covered by your insurance. Because when New York State got into HMOs, and HMOs stopped covering certain things, like requiring births same day, you know, in and out, drive-through deliveries, we call them, 24 hours is all you could stay in the hospital. In response, we began to legislate requirements of health insurance policies. New York State now has the most. We have 33 mandates in the health insurance policies. However, they do not cover, of course, the uninsured, and they don't cover the public policies or interstate company policies, nor companies who are self-insured. They're not there. But the truth of the matter is a lot of those policies already provided these services, and we were mandating that the HMOs and the other policies had to do it. This contraceptive policy, I saw today that the increase in a premium for a single person amounted to $11.80. But I think it's well worth the cost, and it's something I was glad to support then, and we certainly will be looking at this bill as we move forward.
We're on this side of the room. Yes, Brian.
One of many factors that contributes to Plattsburgh and Clinton County's move up the ladder in Site Selection Magazine is the Empire Zone program. There are a number of different proposals about how that Empire Zone program may change. It's scheduled to sunset the legislation, I believe, at the end of July of this year. And one of the proposals could have a seriously negative effect on rural areas like the North Country in terms of some of the new regulations. And I'm a member of the Clinton County Zone Board, not speaking on behalf of that board, but speaking on behalf of economic developers, that we would appreciate your support for continuation of the Empire Zone program in substantively the same form that it is now, so that we can continue to move up that ladder here in Clinton County and Plattsburgh.
I know that portion of the Empire Zone program is a concern, and it's one that has been, we have gotten the ear of the governor on, so hopefully we can get some change on it. I thought, I don't like to talk about proposals either, but in the Assembly conference, we proposed something that I think would go a long way. A lot of our downtown areas in rural New York are without people in their storefronts. People are trying continually to get people to come back into the downtown areas and shop. We proposed an easy Main Street zone program that would give opportunities for anybody who wanted to develop in the downtown area to have grant funds to fix up the buildings. And it would give the localities an opportunity to reduce the sales tax by 1%, and the state would match that 1%, giving a 2% incentive, sales tax incentive for people to shop in our downtown areas. So we are looking at the zones programs. It's an important program. It does bring jobs into the state of New York, and we will continue to push for that equity that you're looking for.
My understanding is that the reason why that program is in jeopardy is because people misused it. Is there any chance that companies could be fined that did misuse it, and that that could help continue the funding in the future?
I think that's the reason that the governor proposed the changes to the Empire Zone. And certainly there needs to be some oversight on some of the loopholes that larger companies seem to be able to access. And one bill that we have is that if you're receiving Empire Zone credits, that you don't have jobs leave the state and things like that we try to do. But how much of that you can actually do in the end is questionable. But the governor in his 30-day amendments did make some changes to those proposals, and I think that it will happen. The crux of the thing is that the speaker is from New York City, and of the 150 members in the assembly, 21 are from Long Island, 65 are from New York City. You are at 86 before you get to the Yonkers City line. And, you know, they can have a block. It just, it's just amazing to be able to do that. And so they're interested in having Empire Zones, you know, for like Chinatown and this area and that area, and then you don't have to spread them out. But we're going to fight this, and in our Senate proposal, we rejected it.
Just a wrinkle on that, the chamber has been promoting, and we know it just moved in the Senate, and we hope it's going to move in the Assembly soon too, is to clarify Empire Zones to make agricultural co-ops able to participate, and that directly affects McAdam Cheney's job. That's already passed. Okay.
Gary?
Okay, thank you for that.
I sit next to the wrong person.
Let me see, who am I going to call on? Rosemary.
We represent this table of 3 of the 4 North Country zones, and Brian is the 4th North Country zone. One of the things that I really needed to say was that I'm really pleased with the governor's proposals and some of his changes to close some of the issues and loopholes that there are. My fear is, because of the things that are going on in the Assembly and in the Senate, that we're going to lose sight of the fact that this program sunsets in 2004, in 3 months. And if the Assembly and the Senate can't get together with the governor and get this sunset clause taken out and to move this very, very important program for the North Country. Brian articulated it very well. I really believe that this program is one of the catalysts that brought us to number 2 in that site selection magazine. So if there's any message that I would want to bring to you all is let's get it done and let's get it moved on so that we have the program in future years.
Thank you. Other hands? Yes.
Hi. My name's Marie Saunders, and I'm with the Saranac School Board of Education, and I am shocked. So, everything today is new to me, and I'm very happy to hear it. And everything here that you're talking about affects us. We provide your future workers. We have the same concerns: health care, pension plan, fuel. And in light of that, as a school board member, our public vote date for a budget is mandated. Could you please give us an indication of the prognosis for an on-time budget?
Probably the best it's ever been. We in the Senate have been passing a budget reform bill. In the Assembly, the Republican conference has been pushing and promoting a budget reform bill through hostile amendments. How can that be hostile? But it is there. This year, for the first time, they passed it at the end of last session, they also passed a budget reform bill. What it does change the date of the budget from April 1st to May 1st. But isn't that better? Income taxes don't come in until April 15th. So it would do that. It also requires you to decide how much money you have by March 10th. And if you can't decide, the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor, then the comptroller decides. So you can be sure they decide rather than let the comptroller decide. But it has some penalties in it. It says that you don't do any other legislation other than the budget bill if you don't have a budget passed, and it says if you don't pass the budget, then you go to the previous year's budget by default until such time that you do pass the budget. But, you know, it's tough because we require the schools to pass their budget by the third Tuesday in May. And that's helped schools, and that was the intent, because if everybody's voting on the same day, more of your budget's passed, and you don't have a lot of domino effect of people hearing other budgets not passing. But it's tough. We talked about changing the date. Last year we changed the date because we were very close to having a budget. It's difficult to change the date because the schools have an awful lot of things contingent upon doing that budget then. It's not as easy for them to not pass the budget until June or the beginning of July. They have teacher contracts, they have all kinds of other issues that have to happen. So we've been committed all along. What happens is you get into a huge difference in philosophy between the Assembly and the Senate. And, you know, one wants to spend this and one wants to spend that. I mean, I never knew what a loft law was until I got to the Assembly and found out that that was how the budget was being held up for the loft law. Every year there is something. This year, the campaign for fiscal equity is a huge, huge issue. And that's the thing that says the New York City schools aren't being funded enough. It was based on 1996 funding. Since that time, there's been an increase in funding all along. And there are two things that have to happen. We have to decide the cost of a basic education, and we have what is a basic education, and then the cost of a basic education, and are we doing it? We would like to see this budget passed and over with before we deal with the campaign for fiscal equity, which has a July requirement. July 1st. 30th, okay. Shelley Silver wants to see some money put aside for the campaign for fiscal equity before, you know, he does that. So,
I just think as a freshman assembly person, last year when we started budgeting, nobody was talking to anybody. I mean, it seemed like everybody had their own little area and they were discussing it among themselves, but there was no real effort to get together and talk about the issues. I think that's different this year, so I really do hold hopes out that we will have a budget that is either on time or nearly on time. We owe that to our schools, we owe that to the people of New York State. For the 11 years I was supervisor of the town of Willsboro and served on the county board, we absolutely had to have a budget on time. It should be no different from those of us who serve in New York State. So I'm hoping it looks good to me.
Everybody's talking about how many letters they've gotten on the subject. I've gotten more letters on urging me to do what I can to help you avoid closing down Moore Elementary School. So if you can do that, we can get a budget on time. And maybe if we can get a budget on time, you'll know the parameters so you can make that decision. A couple of all the signs look very, very good. We ended budget hearings 2 weeks early this year. We got our revenue estimation figures 2 weeks early this year. But most significant to me, I went on the Ways and Means Committee in 1995. And since that time, I have never seen what we call five-way budget talks this early in the game. Five-way means governor, speaker, majority leader, and the two minority leaders. In fact, some years they didn't bring the minority leaders in at all. We've had five-way budget talks, meaning the staffs, the leaders are there negotiating and arguing, and really what you all know as budget talks, we don't even do in New York. You understand that. We don't sit down and talk cases. It's very rare. This year we're doing that. And therefore, it's safe to conclude that we are on a track 2 weeks ahead of what we're supposed to do. And that gives us a 2-week leeway to work out the conference committee differences. So things look very good. And I hope you don't have to close that one preschool.
I'm going to take one final question or comment and ask you to keep it brief. Sarah.
My question is about Medicaid. I really appreciate Senator Little's work that she did on the Medicaid committee. And I sat in on one of the sessions, and it's a very complex question. The county legislators a couple of weeks ago made our annual pilgrimage to visit our state elected officials. We usually come with a number of items. This year we came with one, and that's the Medicaid issue. Medicaid takes up almost 2/3 of our budget. It's a mandated service. We have no control over it. It impacts on our property taxes. It certainly keeps us from providing the services we might like to because the funding is not there and it's going to Medicaid. Do we have hope that there's going to be some relief for the counties, local governments?
Well, first of all, before I get into the Medicaid, definitely relief for the counties is high on everyone's agenda. Our Medicaid task force proposed that the state take over the share of Family Health Plus, which last year grew in enrollment by 91%. Family Health Plus has a county share. Child Health Plus does not, nor does Healthy New York, nor should Family Health Plus. That's one of the things that we should take over, and there is a definite savings, I believe, this year to the counties of $125 million plus. But our recommendations also add some other things. By the way, the governor proposed take over the actual the leftover 10% of home health care, nursing home and home health care over a 10-year period, 1% per year, which definitely would help the counties as well. Whichever one happens, it's going to be a help to the county. We also believe that Family Health Plus is for those who, it's low income, but they're working people, and we believe that it should have benefits similar to if you were working for the state. And you would have deductibles and co-pays and things like that, and the same kind of coverage. It kind of was a great program, no co-pays, no benefits, or no deductibles, and we were seeing some crowd out, like people that, I don't want to name any employers, but employed people at part-time and low wages and would hand them, you don't have to have any health care taken out of your check if you apply for Family Health Plus. Why don't you do that? So it was happening, and there were people going into this program that could have been getting health insurance from their employer. So that's number one. And number two, to help save the counties, if a child is from a family with an income of 133% of the federal poverty level, they would go into Medicaid rather than into Child Health Plus. We want to put them at 100% of the poverty level, all into Child Health Plus, where there's no county share in that way. Of the people on Medicaid, 30% of the people on Medicaid are elderly and disabled. However, they take 70% of the cost. And one of the things that we have to look at, beyond just, Medicaid has always been the payer. Pay the bills, pay for this, pay for that, pay for the other thing. We need to get into disease management. We need to get into data collection. I went to New York City and saw their computer system for how they track their Medicaid clients, and it was far superior to anything that we have in our counties. We need to do that. We have people in Albany who do nothing but find Medicaid fraud as to who is on Medicaid here, and it's like an HMO, so their county is paying, the state is paying their insurance, and they moved away. They're in another state on their Medicaid. So we need to do that. The thing in New York City that amazed me was every day they run a computer run of their Medicaid clients and the lottery winners. So they are out to get you, believe me. There's other instances when one parent would make a child eligible for Child Health Plus. They should be getting that. And then sometimes what we have cases that people have called me on where you have separated parents, the mother's income, the child is mostly with the mother, that income is Medicaid eligible, the child's on Medicaid. If they were on the father's income, they could have been on Child Health Plus. But because they're on Medicaid, then they go and have some expensive medical thing, and social services is required to go after that father to pay for that Medicaid cost. I had one where they had $6,000 worth of dental, big dental problem, obviously. And they went after the father for the $6,000. Well, what does that do? It takes away from the child support. It's ridiculous. So if one parent is eligible for Child Health Plus, that's where the child needs to be and what he needs to go on. Everyone here in Clinton County is reeling from the loss of John Johnson, the mental health director. I just sat down with him. He was in my office just about 2-3 weeks ago, and we were sitting talking about case management of the mentally ill. There's a huge savings there, and he was doing it. He needed more case managers to be able to do more of that. But so many people are in a situation and they run to the emergency room. And you know, Gary mentioned the health insurance in this area. It was tough to try to keep health now in Clinton, Essex County. Argue and debate with them. How can you tell me Clinton, Essex County people cost more? Are they sicker or what? You know, and oh no, the cost is more and more and more. Thank God we have director of the state insurance fund who does not believe in redlining and said if you're going to raise your rates, you got to raise it for the whole thing. But that battle's not over yet. They are still on our back because they want a different product. They want to be able to raise their rates. They've showed me utilization rates are higher and all. But it's a rural area. Now, if you're 40 miles from the hospital, you need to stay there. You can't be running back and forth, you know, have patients on day surgery or outpatient when they need to be on inpatient. So there's a lot of issues here. We need to promote the long-term home health care. And, you know, here we are, 5 senators, you know, we gather all these people around and, okay, raise your hand if you have long-term home health care insurance. Good. And nobody in our room had it. We have to start looking at that. And we also have to look at other types of care for the elderly. We give $27 a day to put a person in an adult home. And, you know, it's not much more than what it costs to take your dog to the kennel. And yet, we're requiring and asking these adult homes to take care of people at this cost. And therefore, they can't. So a lot of people are in nursing homes that might well be better suited to an assisted living, and I know that assisted living is going to happen up here and working hard to see that we need more of those, and adult homes. The continuum of care. I really don't believe that our people here are all going to end in a nursing home like maybe would have 20 years ago. We have healthier lifestyles. We are working harder at staying fit and eating better and taking care of our health and all of that. And I think we're also making accommodations for our long-term home health care with savings and looking at retirement communities. And, you know, at our age, you build a house, you make sure it has wider hallways and bathroom doors and all that kind of stuff so that you can be at home and home health care would be more suitable for you. So I think there have to be some changes to that, and we have to look at this transfer of assets. We have to incentivize getting long-term home health care. Right now you get a 20% credit. We've got to open that up. We've got to get a better product. We've got to really push that long-term care health insurance. And those are some of the things that we have recommended, and hopefully we'll be able to have a savings, not just to the county, that's first and foremost, because they have no place to go but to your property tax. And, you know, the businesses are talking about health insurance. The residents of New York State are talking about property taxes. It's a killer. And it's a killer for our schools. If their aid stays flat, their health insurance, pension costs, and teacher salaries do not stay flat. And therefore, where do they go? Property tax. And, you know, if you're a community and you're on a lakefront, I had somebody, you know, so how do we regulate this increase in assessments on lakefront homes? I said, well, maybe I ought to fill all the lakes with concrete. Everyone wants to live on a lake. I had a woman whose assessment had gone from $590 to $2 million. And I said to her, well, would your house sell for more than $2 million? Oh, she said, of course it would. But I can't afford the $40,000 in taxes. So I said, well, why don't you get a home equity loan? And, you know, help yourself pay the taxes. Then when you sell, and maybe your family does have a $100,000 mortgage or a $200,000 mortgage. Well, she said, you're chipping away at my equity and my right to own lakefront property. We should all have that right. Anyway, there are tons of issues, obviously, and thank you for all your interest.
The question Sarah asked was Medicaid. One of the things that Teresa and I proposed last year, proposed again this year, is in all of what's needed, and broad Medicaid reform is essential, just like tort reform is. Otherwise, you're just patching the roof. But Clinton County, Franklin County, Essex County, they need the roof patched too. And we are still pushing for a $200 million emergency Medicaid relief package that would just go right to the counties. And one of the reasons that we think that's only fair is that last year, the legislature bailed out New York City, assumed the debt that New York City incurred back in 1976, the interest on which is about $177 million a year. So if we can bail out New York City for $177 million, our proposal is to bail out just 1 year the non-New York City counties by the tune of $200 million. So we'll keep working on that.
Do any of us have to pay that?
Do any of you have to pay that? Well, sure, but it would come away from something else that we don't think is as worthwhile. Just a statistic for the news media in the room and others who keep track of such things. Franklin County forwarded me their first 7 weeks of Medicaid share figures. Last year, first 7 weeks in Franklin County, it was $1,202,000. Annually, it was about $7.6 million. This year, it's $1,226,000. That's a 2% increase. That's better than the 67% increase they had last year. But it's still going up. The need is still there. The hemorrhaging is still happening, and the counties are still not out of the woods.
If I could just make another comment. I believe, this is great, the site selection numbers for Plattsburgh, but I also think that one of the big reasons that we have people consider this area such a great place to live and do business is the location of our SUNY Plattsburgh here. And Dr. John Clark is here, and I know he won't be with us next year, but I just know that he has done a great job for Plattsburgh this year, and we know, thank you for all you've done. Part of the economic development of the North Country. Education is a big part of our economic development. Paul Smith College over in the Saranac Lake, Paul Smith's area, believe me, those jobs and the people they bring there and the visitors that come because of it and the name recognition, it helps in a community to have a college, community college, four-year college, private school in your area. So we truly support all we can do for education too. Thank you.
Another reminder, Jody Parks would be very angry with me if I went back and didn't mention this again. Chris has already mentioned it. Make Jody happy today. If you haven't gotten your St. Patrick's Day reservations in, give us a call, get them in. It's always a great time. I'm sure Kevin collected some material here today. So. Thank you all for providing that. Thank you all for coming today and join me in thanking our legislators for being with us.